There's a philosophy that would have said you should be only shooting at high value problems, the highest value stuff. You should be laser focused. And I said, no, we're going core. We're going, beyond the core. We're going everywhere. So you're a technologist over here. You want to build a new technology. You find the startup. It looks very exciting. Everybody's very happy. But over here, this is the site that's actually going to implement this thing. And sometimes that wasn't aligned at the very beginning.
Right.
I think the number one thing for startups, in my opinion, is a lot of transparency just about the timelines. Like, look, this isn't going to happen next week.
Right.
There's also what I call the Hail Mary pass. You've been working on this problem, real quote, yeah, we've been working on this 85 years, they said. 85 years. And so what are you going to do? Well, we need to go outside the walls.
I don't know if you're using 85 just as a random number or
real quote.
All right. Well, Kyle, thanks for being here. Really excited to have a chat with you about your work at Exxon. We'll jump right into this because today we're really going to be talking about what's called client venturing or venture clienting. I'm not sure which way we'll go with that, but that's your expertise and what you're focused on. So maybe just share a little bit about what your role is and how you think about the importance of client venturing.
Great. Well, I've been at ExxonMobil for 10 years, 7 years as a geophysicist, building images of the Earth, very technical. Last 3 years, I've been on a journey to help the company become more externally leveraged. That's really the vector I was given, help us get out there. Venture clienting is one of the capabilities where we're essentially looking for startups that have solutions to some of our more challenging problems. We're looking for that partnership, but we're not investing in the CVC type model. What we're doing, we're basically coming in as a big customer. We like your product. Maybe it's not 100% what we need. There's some joint development going on. We can bring our technical expertise to the fray. We can bring our facilities if we want to test these solutions. And then obviously, if it works, we're a very big customer. So it's really a win-win situation. That's how I view venture clienting. Underlying all that is you need processes that are streamlined and fast. These engineers and scientists, they don't have time to be mired in process. So I think a big part of venture clienting is also the streamlining to actually go and do these types of activities, because not everybody's brought in a startup company. And a startup company, as y'all know, it's a different thing than working with an established large multinational vendor with a product that you're just buying.
Did you sell it into leadership, or was leadership effectively already there? They thought this branching out into the external side and corporate startup collaboration made sense?
My program is really rooted in strategy, and it's not a new strategy. It's something that has come up a few times over the years that, hey, we're a very big place, but the world is an even bigger place, and we should find ways to very efficiently access the horsepower that's out there for certain types of problems. So I was essentially given a vector rooted in strategy, very open-ended. It just helped us figure it out. And at the beginning, there's really just three simple questions. What's a good fit to go outside? What's the right tool for the job? And then how do you execute that tool efficiently and effectively? That's where I started. Venture clienting, this is just one of the tools that is on the tool belt, depending on what the team is trying to do.
I mean, that was going to be my exact question too, why? But how do you decide then, tool in the toolbox makes complete sense. How do you decide when to go look to the outside versus any other option, like be it R&D in-house or not pursuing it or working with a bigger company and just becoming a customer? How do you decide when it's the right time to say, we got to go find a startup and bring them in through this program?
So at ExxonMobil, it all starts with problem definition. You all know this, but what exactly are you trying to do? And about 20% of the time, that's where I end. I help them start to define the problem. Maybe they got to go back to the drawing board. Maybe they need to collect some data. What are the requirements? What is the timing? So that's where it starts. After that, we go to internal canvassing. We're going to look, what have we done in the past? Over 150 years of history here, very large research in development divisions. So we need to tap into that. And those connections, they often come from different parts of the company. You got this one over here where maybe they're finding and producing oil and gas. This one is refining the oil and gas, but lo and behold, there's a solution that crosses. So I'm always trying to help create those connections And that's about 40% of the time right now. So 40% of the time, we've defined the problem, we start looking, there's the internal team, and they say, Kyle, thank you very much, goodbye, we're good. After that, that's really where the decision comes in. There's a few situations where I think venture clienting makes the most sense. The most obvious one is you're just trying to go a little faster. You don't want to build it from scratch. Can we find a partner? Again, maybe even if it's a 50% solution, that's still 50% savings on your development of that solution. If you're trying to fuel the front end of a funnel, you're kind of at the very beginning of a project, you just want to say, what's out there? Let's just see what's out there. Maybe that helps set our expectations. Sometimes that confirms our expectations. We look out there, sure enough, we didn't find what we're looking for. Let's go ahead with our internal development. Reducing costs is an obvious one. If you have an option, maybe it's an internal option or external, and you're just saying, is there something that's lower cost that's out there? Again, you find a scrappy startup, they hack something out, they can go very fast, they can operate at much lower cost at times. So those are some of the scenarios. There's also what I call the Hail Mary pass. You've been working on this problem, real quote, yeah, we've been working on this 85 years, they said. 85 years. And so what are you going to do? Well, we need to go outside the walls. We need to get out there. And so those kind of Hail Mary passes, obviously, I'd like to come in a lot earlier than that. And that's where we're trying to go with this program. Is this would be something you do much earlier in the R&D stage.
Yeah, I don't know if you're using 85 just as a random number, or if you have a particular example of that, which we won't go into that. But I do like the idea that you're there early in the process, because I think a lot of times we see companies doing startup partnerships as a tool in the toolbox, but it's much later in the process. And it sounds to me like you're getting involved early, even to figure out if there's a problem we're solving, and then figuring out if client venturing is the right tool to use. And if not, fine. But to me, I think that's what a lot of big companies miss, is that let's go like really evaluate this stuff first principles, then look at the tools in the toolbox and figure out which one to use.
Yeah, I think it's pretty critical that you've also really focused on the problem definition phase, which we see often gets missed. Should never be kind of underestimated in that phase. Do you feel that there's been more momentum over the last 3 years? Because there must be a lot of skeptics as well in this process. Because you mentioned 85 years, that really doesn't even seem like a Hail Mary pass at that point. That seems like more like an Old Yeller moment.
It's interesting. Yeah, I would just say, reacting to what Ben said real quick, is that this isn't something that every team is doing at the start. That's where we're trending. But 3 years ago when I started this program, what are you talking about? What are you trying to do? Now, I would say we have the proof points. We're getting that momentum. It's becoming more ingrained. It's becoming more normal. We actually have a verb for it. It's called open innovating. So you say, hey, have you open innovated that program? So Marcus, yeah, in terms of that skepticism, early days, people asking a lot of questions about how much time is this going to take our people. You have a lot of process burden questions, intellectual property questions. Obviously, there are the cultural elements, and people know those. The not invented here syndrome is a very real thing. It's not an Exxon thing. Every big organization has it. So I would say, starting out, lots of questions about what are we doing and why. I was given the leeway to say, let's be open to let's try this out. That's sort of where the senior management was at. Let's give this guy a chance. And what happened is you get those early wins, the snowball starts rolling, and we got the proof points. And I'd say that's where we are today. I still have skepticism every day. Every day, somebody says, I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's out there. I think over time, the proof is coming, and that's really coming through the storytelling. So I'm really big on getting these stories out there to show these tools can work, to show that they can be fast, they can be low cost, and that's a culture change journey at the end of the day. It's going to take probably 5 to 10 years to get through that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you've been at this 3 years, which sounds like a long time, really isn't that long. You've mentioned early wins. Not specifically which wins, but how did you structure this to say, I got to get early wins? And then how do you define those wins? Is it really about, hey, we actually solved this problem and we've proven it? Or is it more the storytelling of people coming back and saying, shoot, I didn't think you'd ever find an answer to that? Or so how are you looking at that early ROI to get more people convinced that looking for startups is one of the, it's worth doing?
So when I started the program, the only thing I needed from a customer, if you will, is organizational readiness. You're ready to go try it. Let's go. I did a very aggressive marketing campaign, if you will. I'm talking to hundreds of teams. These are the tools I have. These are the things we can do. As I already told you, the types of problems, these are the types of problems that are a good fit, and just shots on goal, shots on goal, shots on goal. Now, at this time, I think there's a philosophy that would have said you should be only shooting at high value problems, the highest value stuff. You should be laser focused. And I said, no, we're going core, we're going, beyond the core, we're going everywhere. And what I would say, though, the early wins, a lot of those, I would call them core innovations. These were not super exciting step out, new business models, new technologies. These were a team that had a real problem. You find that external solution provider, you get in there, you start piloting, a little tweaking, and you're saving the company money. It's working. So that's what I would say is very, very broad. No limits on what type of problem I was solving. Also at that time, the funding was a little more centralized. I was able to support some of these teams because there was just a lot of uncertainty. Is this really going to work? So I think having that, and then just who are those innovators, and you know who they are. You can find them. I have a metric on it. It's about 1 in 20 people in the company. When I present these tools, about 1 in 20, roughly, they come and they reach out and they want to know more. They're curious. So you got to find that 1 in 20, and you got to give them some grease to get the wheels turning, and that can be funding. But that's really what I would say getting started.
Some really important insight there. I mean, that 1 in 20 is something specific, which again, I think is a ratio that makes a lot of sense from our own experience. But I want to double click a little bit when you talked about organizational readiness, because that's defined different ways. And I think the momentum you've been able to build over the last 3 years, I think a lot of people would like to understand that a bit better and how you see that from your lens.
So for me, numbers game, knocking on doors. Now, some of those seminars were terrible. I walked out of there with a black eye. I'm like, oh man, this went terrible. And I never heard from those folks again. The readiness was, here's an individual that comes and they say, hey, I think I have something here that might be a good fit. We start talking. It's clear the culture of the team, they're open to working externally. Maybe they already work very externally. But then more importantly, that supervisor says, yeah, let's go try it out. Yeah, this sounds like a good fit. So that's the readiness. I think it was a cultural inertia. They already have the gusto to go do something like this. Now, this is a different way of doing it, but it's not a radically different way. Some of those teams, they're building their solutions internally from scratch. They don't do anything external. And by the way, sometimes there's a good reason for that. Just the problem itself. You can't talk about that. You're going to give away our venture. But yes, that's really what it was all about. The people that just had the capacity, the culture. That's how I got started.
Yeah, I just want to quickly also give you credit there, because sometimes not enough spotlight comes through there. Like, you got a couple of black eyes, but you weren't knocked out. And I think often folks that are trying to bridge these worlds on the inside, sometimes they don't have enough grit to continue the battle because it is painful, right? Like, I think, you should give yourself credit and your team as well for really, pushing forward these deals and building the momentum.
So when we look at building this program, which we're growing the program here, there's one thing at the very top of that page: grit. If you're going to come do open innovation in my program, you got to have grit in spades. And I want them to have an experience where they did something and they failed. I want to see failure. I want to see that trait that they're just going to push through when it comes, and when they get the tomatoes thrown, which still happens to this day. This isn't gone. We're not done yet. So yes, that is the number one most important thing, I think, to get started in this type of work.
And so how systematized is the program now? Let's say 1 in 20 folks say, hey, I think I've got something. You're getting tomatoes thrown, black eyes. It just sounds like total chaos all the time over there. But but somebody is interested and they say, I've got this problem, or I want to work on this problem with you, Kyle. Yeah, client venturing, it does make sense. How systematized is the process then? Because you mentioned a couple of other things that are coming up: funding, IP, speed. We know all these things are hard. So do you have like a guys, let me walk you through exactly how we're going to do it, or is it totally case by case?
I am ruthlessly focused on automation, templates, workflows, guidelines, self-help, you name it. Every single week, practically, we're refining some element of this program. So I would say it's a very structured process. Lots of documents. Like somebody will ask me a question. Well, tell me about the IP. What do I need to know? Well, here you go. Here's my document called How to Build an IP Strategy. Tell me about working with procurement. How do we actually make these payments? Here's my document, how to work with procurement. So yes, if I get a question, I'm a big fan of making a PowerPoint deck. My library now is over 180 documents. I have some people telling me they're using this repository every day. So that's what I would say is what I've tried to do is templatize anything that comes. I've got a bunch of email templates. If they ask me a certain question, I just go to there and I send them the template. I'm done. I'm in and out in 10 seconds.
You've automated yourself out of a job with PowerPoint.
Pretty much. And sometimes some of those decks, maybe I spent a few hours building it and I'll never get that question again. But that's the risk I'm willing to take, that I'm going to go do the documentation, do the due diligence, go talk to the expert. Say, hey, this person asked me a question. I built these slides. What do you think? What do you have? So I am ruthless about digging into the weeds on these questions that come. But the payout is, again, when now I can be very rapid in my responses as we go. And then again, we're looking at things like automation. We could talk more about different types of third-party collaboration models I've constructed, just trying to get people into our system, make things faster. But yes, I would say that's at the core of this entire program. It's got to be efficient. It's got to save people time, not take a bunch of time.
Yeah. Oh, Kyle, I mean, I know you're ducking the tomatoes. There's like a lot of chaos around you, like you described. But before moving on to that, I mean, I think what's also important to kind of recognize is your ability to adapt, and also the foundation you put in place, because creating all these, PowerPoint templates and having the structure allows you to effectively evolve into other use cases and then look beyond. Just on the topic of the IP piece, that's always, a lot of corporates we've seen over the years have a tough time in that balance. Is there any insights from your experience or hacks that you could provide just on the insights on how to deal with that kind of startup corporate IP challenge?
Yeah, well, just to recalibrate, I mean, I would say the stories about the black eyes and tomatoes, those are much fewer in frequency nowadays. Just to share that anecdote. But yeah, starting, it was rough. I've got the credibility now in general, so it's a lot easier, and we've got the stories to back it up. In terms of IP, what I would say is there is the perceived IP risk, and there is the real IP risk. And so when you're talking to a team, oftentimes they're uncalibrated on, for instance, what they can talk about externally and what they can't. And I'll test in a meeting. I'll say, well, hey, your manager's right there. Why don't you ask them? And I've heard this quote one time. The manager said, I could care less who you talk to about this problem. Just get out there and solve it. And so one of the benefits of working with my team, some of those managers have reported a culture change on the team because they didn't know. And now they're bringing these new things from outside. They want to go to the conference. They want to engage. And so they didn't know what was possible. So again, culture change is a big part of this thing. What's okay, what's not okay. I would also say, again, putting together really easy to use guidelines, like not some giant legalese document thing with a very strict this and what you can't do. I've put together some very simple documents on building your IP strategy. We have multiple different versions of what you may have heard about the build, partner, buy framework. We have different versions of that. We have a really easy tool we made. You go through a questionnaire. It says, based on that, this is 100% buy, or maybe it's a 20% buy, 50% build. So those are some of the ways I've tried to address it. But again, at the end of the day, I think it's an education thing. You have to educate on this is perceived risk. We don't really need to build this thing. And I think there's a lot of inertia coming in that you really have to overcome. And that's very hard to do as an outsider from the team.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like a lot of education. And then, of course, a pilot is successful. Other people see that and say, well, I want that thing. And then a couple more pilots later on, and another person says, well, why can't I have that thing? So it sounds to me like now a little bit snowball down a hill. There's momentum, there's proof points. What about on the startup side? I mean, of course, startups want to work with big companies. They want to sell their technology or their services to big companies. What do you tell them about, and how do you set expectations for them about what it's going to be like to work with Exxon?
Yeah, I think setting expectations is important. I think the number one thing for startups, in my opinion, is a lot of transparency just about the timelines. Like, look, this isn't going to happen next week. If we decide to go forward with this, we're going to have to get you into the system, particularly if it's anything related to software. We're going to need to do some pretty rigorous risking on that. That's going to take you some time. But in general, I find that startups, our people, our individuals, like as a company, maybe things can take a long time. But I find that the collaboration can happen in real time, and it can be very fast. We can actually cycle very fast within certain conditions. Like if the manager is aligned, there's a real problem. We have alignment on what we're trying to do. We have a vision. We have a customer internally. So if it's a technology solution, that's great. What's even better is an actual business in the company that says, if you can find me something that can do X, Y, Z, I'm willing to pilot it here at my plant. I'm even willing to pay. So kind of getting all that lined up ahead of time, when the startup comes, we can do things actually relatively quickly. We also at ExxonMobil, we have a group called our Technology Scouting and Ventures Organization. And this is a group of artists. I mean, this is what they do: is they find startups, they work with startups, they help incubate those startups, bring them in. And so usually what I'll do is I'll try to bring one of those people in tow if we're going to be doing something with early stage. So now you have that team has a dedicated person who's been doing this stuff for years. That individual can help grease the skids, kind of get things through the system much more effectively.
What's been, you said relatively quickly, fast. What's the fastest pilot you've ever been able, or get started? Because sometimes the pilots themselves can take long, but give us just a parameter of what do you mean when you're saying relatively fast or quick? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so in terms of how fast these can turn around, a great example of that, we did a global request for information. We send this thing out there globally, 45 proposals from all over the world. We narrowed it down to 8. We started meeting with these companies. Most of these are very small startup type companies. One of them, they actually showed up to the pitch session and they had a prototype they started to show us. So this is the first meeting. They're already there. We gave them some feedback. We said, well, that looks great, but you're going to need to work on these other elements. 2 days later, they send us an email. They said, hey, we've got the new prototype. Do you want to meet again? And that really blew me away, that the willingness of a small startup, they see that prize, they see what's there, they're coming with the prototype, they're iterating in 2 days, and they're ready to meet again. So that's the power of a startup company, is that ability to focus in, they see the prize, and then the ability to go very, very fast. So these can happen on the order of days. In terms of actually getting it implemented into the site, I've seen the fastest is about 3 months. So we screened it, we saw it, we liked it. We commissioned them, we brought them in, and then we have it being applied in the unit. Now that application, the timing was already fixed, so that drove the pace. So that's why it was able to go so fast, because we said, hey, we have an opportunity to test it. You want to test it or not? And everybody got on board, and we got that done quick. But yes, very, very fast compared to traditional R&D timelines.
It does show that it's possible. I think that's the key message here. It's everybody thinks about the speed with which big companies move. We all know startups move faster. Sometimes the startups will say, oh, this will take forever. I don't know if it's worth my effort. Sometimes the corporate will say, this is going to take us too long to pull off anyway. And yet you can execute a pilot within a few months, and you can start to see ROI within a few months. And so it is possible with the right resources and motivation. I just think it's an interesting benchmark for folks to target themselves against.
Yeah, I would just quickly add to that as well. I mean, I think the investment you made into that process, Kyle, was also really impressive. That gave the output of that quick speed from what we've seen kind of in the industry as a whole. So getting down to taking that decision of, okay, here's 8 we're going to bring in. right? And thinking through how you build momentum and setting those expectations with the startups, that is going to take time. But it seems like you already set the deck for success with both maybe the technology readiness, because you did the RFI out there already to start with at the top. And then you also had kind of the political side that's kind of lined together. Often what we're seeing is that sometimes in one of those camps, there's some issues that creates a lot more bottlenecks where these things then to take 6, 12 months. And as you know, the runway for most startups, as nimble as they are, becomes a lot more high pressure, high stake for them to kind of take a bet on their end should they partner with a large organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, let's. I'd love to talk a little bit more about open innovation, because that's in effect what you are doing. There's different terms for it. So, is there something that you believe in this industry of open innovation or client venturing that you hold true that most people do not?
I would say there's two elements of my program that are quite unique. The first one would be the focus on what we call open talent models. So that could be as simple as a simple one-on-one expert interview with an outside party on a certain technology area. You bring them in, you have a discussion, you get up to speed, and then they leave. To maybe bringing 10 people together, 10 experts on a topic, and having a very robust discussion around that. So those open talent models, that's something that you're probably not going to see in most open innovation programs. And the other piece is a focus on open sourcing models. So whether that's sharing our data externally or sharing our processes or something externally, or bringing something in from the outside world that's open sourced and using that to further our business needs, it's a two-way funnel. But I think those two capabilities are ones that are really quite unique and also have a lot of potential that is currently not being met.
Did you start with open talent models 3 years ago, or did that come as you built momentum with your program?
So I started with an all of the above, about 50 different tools, and I talked about all the tools. What I found over time is a lot of those tools, like how to leverage and influence vendors, how to work with academics, how to work with labs. I find people, their eyes were glazing over. They just weren't excited about it. They weren't impressed by it. As I started to talk about global crowdsourcing, global request for information, open talent models, I found that one, they often were not familiar with these concepts. What are you talking about? What's an open talent model? And two, as I started to execute projects, these are the ones that actually are really moving the needle. Helping a team onboard a software faster, that's great. But they could already do that. Finding them a world expert on a topic and bringing them in 2 days and having a discussion, that was a very radical concept, really moves the needle. So that's what I would say. It started with an all of the above, and I've just learned that those are the techniques that really get people excited.
So that's interesting, because I hadn't thought of that, really, to be honest with you, before. So you're doing more than this notion of client venturing, where I'm going to go find a specific startup to solve a specific problem. Sometimes it's, hey, wait, there's a domain expert over there, and if we could bring them in for a couple of hours to jam with the team, that might be the unlock that we need. So you're actually out there not just looking exclusively for startups. Sometimes you're looking for other things like talent.
Yeah. And my program, it's an all of the above strategy and more. I mean, we're building new capabilities, which I'm not going to talk a lot about here. But I would just say, in terms of my portfolio of tools, we're not just staying with what is in the books and in the literature. We're also exploring new workflows and new tools and new models. And so stay tuned. You'll maybe see more of those come out over time. But yeah, it's an all of the above. If you want to work externally, if we don't have it, we can build it. We can build you a custom solution. Startups are a part of that for sure. But yeah, sometimes we're looking for ideas and concepts. Sometimes we're looking for confirmation of our direction. So it doesn't always involve kind of partnering with the startup. Now, I know for your audience, they're going to be more interested in the venture clienting space based on what I saw on your webpage. But yeah, sure enough, there's a lot of other stuff here
going on. Yeah. And when you say open sourcing of stuff, maybe just double click into that. What do you mean by that? Is that you sharing information publicly about, or with other corps about what you're doing? Is it learning from other corporates on what they're doing and best practices? What does that mean for you?
So it could be data. Obviously, ExxonMobil, we have a lot of different data sets, and sometimes we're not going to use those anymore. We don't view those as competitive. We can give those to, for instance, a university. Somebody can do a PhD thesis on it. It could be, say, a software. Maybe we developed a tool. Again, we don't view it as a competitive advantage. We're not going to use it anymore. We can open source that. It could be around building industry-wide standards. If you look at open process automation, a great example of that. If you look at other types of tools we're building, we want to build those with partners externally. We don't want to build it in-house. We want everybody to use the same system, the same language. It could be a language, could be a process. Any of these things, it's us kind of putting something out there into the public sphere. We're basically giving it away. And there's often a strategic underlying reason for that. But open sourcing goes two ways. It also could involve, there's a lot of open sourcing tools coming out. If you look at Meta, if you look at Google, they're open sourcing all sorts of stuff, language models, vision models, all sorts of different things. And so another part of open sourcing is the best practices on what can you bring in? How do you bring it in? A very quick, easy one pager on the different types of license agreements so you can quickly understand, is this something that might fit with us or not? So that's in a nutshell kind of what that open sourcing program is all about.
I mean, I think what's also important, what you just highlighted there, is that you're also equally investing in kind of the ecosystem on the outside. And that's allowing you to also bring in those best practices, as Ben described, collaborate potentially with other corporates beyond just startups. And it pays a lot of dividends in the bigger picture. I think, again, like the portfolio construction of startups and other tools like you described is also a function of just how you take a beyond the core kind of approach to everything, right? So I think it's fantastic that you've been able to build that momentum.
Yeah, to me, I think if you want to do open innovation successfully, you have to be a good, fair participant in the ecosystem. Otherwise, it's just take, 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 take. So there has to be some give and take there and some willingness to partner. Are there I don't know if you can share examples of that stuff that you've done. Open source would be a little bit more public, I suppose. What are the examples of stuff that you've done around that to say, hey, we have this asset or this resource, or we've learned this thing and we want to share it, knowing that could pay dividends for Exxon, for many years to come.
I think a great example, which it kind of overlaps with what Marcus was saying there. One of the things ExxonMobil has a lot of is called cores. So when you drill a well, you can collect an actual sample. It sort of looks about the size of this coffee mug, and you can imagine it's maybe 100 feet tall. And we break it up into boxes, and you've got all these cores. That allows geoscientists to actually get their hands on the actual sample. You can look at things like the grains, you can look at structures, fossils, all sorts of good stuff. So a few years ago, ExxonMobil, we looked at our core library. It's this huge warehouse filled with these cores, and we basically made a decision. We said, these are the cores that we want to keep. These are the cores that we don't really see any further potential there. We actually donated that core. It's now this huge library, and one of our trade associations in this case, sometimes it's academic, sometimes it's a trade association, but they've taken that core, they've made it available for the public. This is mostly for academic type folks, but they've also digitized the core. That's now, all of that is available to folks in that trade association. So that's a great example of giving it away. You're creating these connections externally, and you're really fueling innovation outside of the walls.
Yeah, a lot of the pushback we sometimes hear about is like, what is the ROI of investing in kind of open innovation or some of these ecosystem initiatives? And I think you encapsulated it too, but the transparency, the culture, having a lot of the automation of some of these toolkits and giving these different options, it does take a time, an investment of time to actually yield the results and momentum. Maybe you could talk a little bit about helping to prove that ROI case for venture climbing in general, or just making investments beyond kind of the core.
Yeah, well, I would say one of the things I'm a big fan of is 2x2s. So I do have a 2x2 of how long is the tool going to take and what is the likelihood it's going to deliver value. Open sourcing is the longest duration, and the time to value on that, I have it in a category of its own of maybe never. So yes, it is a fuzzy model, to be sure.
and honest.
Yeah,
It's a fuzzy tool.
That's specific to open sourcing as a.
That's open sourcing.
Not client venturing.
That's right. Venture clienting is one of my top tools. On the other hand, very fast and very high chance we'll find you something. But yes, so that just to comment on that. So ROI, this is a very good question. Another question that is that when I started, right, people, they're asking the question like, well, why are you working on this very core innovation thing over here? Shouldn't we be doing the big, bright, exciting things all the time? So our ROI is another one that would come up. Like, well, what are you doing? You know, what value have you delivered, right? So ROI for me, it starts with different types of metrics. So we have our input metrics. How many people did I talk to? How many projects have I screened? Blah, 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 the 20%, the 40%. Those are kind of just like some metrics. Then you get into like your outputs, like what are you actually getting out of it? How many did you find? How many solutions? There's the key question I always have. Are we actually finding you something novel? And right now my batting average is 100. I mean, we always are going to find something new. It might not be commercial, but some of those other metrics, we like to do a retrospective valuation. That's very tangible. Pilots that were actually implemented, we actually moved the needle. How much? Then we have our prospective valuation. And this gets very tricky. There's a couple things I like to ask. One is, do you have pilots that are planned? So you found something, you actually have a plan to implement it and test it. Is that planned? If so, what do you think the value would be if that's successful? And then, again, a very tricky metric, but what is the chance of success? We do our best to be rational about that. If you multiply those two together, there's your risk perspective valuation. As you go into the future, it's okay, let's say you're successful. The pilot works. That's great. What's the chance that you can actually deploy this across all of our other assets, our other applications? That's going to be your ultimate potential value. Again, we try to do some risking on that. But that's kind of where we're at. I would say if you look at my project pipeline, we've got delivery of value on about 20% of the projects. Well, let me say this. 20% of the projects, we've either delivered value or we didn't. It didn't work. There's nothing left. So most of my pipeline is still just kind of testing and incubating, and we'll see what comes. I think it's going to take us a few years to get to some of these more tangible metrics, like average value delivery on the projects. What type of projects did this work well? Maybe when did it not work so well? What parts of the company does it work well? When does it not work so well? So I keep telling my stakeholders, it's kind of like a stay tuned. What's nice is since we did do some core innovation, that was enough. That crossed the bar to say, hey, this stuff is for sure worthwhile. We're getting value out of this. There's no doubt. But I think going forward, we're going to focus more and more on the bigger prizes, and you'll see that in my portfolio. The size of the prize is going up. The chance of success is going down. The willingness to make big bets is going up. And those may take 10 years before I know what comes out of it. So I think we're still a little early for ROI at the 3-year mark. But I think that, again, just the retrospective valuations are enough to keep the lights on.
Yeah, and Kyle, I'll just quickly add, I mean, I think also invalidating some of these things is putting points on the board and creating value that sometimes we've seen is often neglected. And when they do these ROI calculations and try to make the case of how venture clienting is actually creating value, getting to a fast no, and how you've said the speed, I think, is also an insight. Is other things, but you did a great job just articulating already, which I think is really hard to do, that you had kind of these binary outcomes and there is some quantitative measurement to build momentum, and the bigger swings are going to come like any sort of venture portfolio and much, much further down the line as you build more momentum.
Yeah, it sounds like, and I'm glad you used the word portfolio, because you're clearly thinking about it that way, that it's not every bet's going to win or one bet's going to win and a whole bunch of others will fail necessarily, but there's a portfolio of stuff, some home runs, maybe bigger bets, some base hits. But I think to me, it sounds like portfolio and patience. And if we can agree on those two things, we have a shot at making this client venturing model work. And so maybe like I think every big company, or almost every big company, has some version of this, whether they've structured it properly or not. So you're 3 years in, you got a long road ahead of you to just keep growing and improving the model. Somebody comes to you and says, Kyle, I need to do this better than we're doing it right now. We've partnered haphazardly with a couple of startups. I need I need to do this better, what would be your sort of 1, 2, 3 things that you would tell them that they have to do to get themselves going? I'm not going to say share every doc with us, but that would be cool. Like share every PowerPoint with us. So just
Ben would love that, though. Ben
that would
would
just be
love
cool.
that.
Just be like, here's all 5,000 PowerPoints of everything. But what are the top? Somebody comes to you and says, we're doing this, but we're not doing it great. You're like, guys, these are the first 3 things I need you to do.
Two soft answers, and then I'll try to actually answer the question. The first soft answer is it depends, right? I mean, there's a lot of variables. Over time, I've developed an understanding of what those variables are. The number one variable for me is what's the value proposition, because that really drives pretty much everything. There can be a lot of slowdowns and windy turns and things. If you don't have a clear, what are we trying to do and why and what is it worth? And that goes for us. And the startup needs to be aware of the prize as well. So that's kind of where I start. My second soft answer, which you poked at it a little bit, but I do have a deck called Working with Startups, and it's about 25 pages. I've put together a lot of best practices on how to do this, largely from external sources, but also from internal sources. And I've got stories from some of our top experts that have had really successful engagement with startups. I did an interview with them, and I just captured that. I said, what's important to you? What works? What doesn't work? And so I've captured that material as well. So yes, I do have a PowerPoint for that. Other than that, I think it really just boils down to alignment. One of the key things that I find that can really stifle working with a startup is you don't have, so you're a technologist over here. You want to build a new technology. You find the startup, it looks very exciting. Everybody's very happy. But over here, this is the site that's actually going to implement this thing. And sometimes that wasn't aligned at the very beginning. Now, we're getting much better at that as a company. This is becoming much more formal. We're getting a lot better. But that's one thing that I would say is kind of getting all those stakeholders in the room to get more clarity on what the requirements are, on the value proposition. If we meet this, we're all going to be happy. Is that correct? Yes. Getting the startup, aligned on the timeline. Again, kind of how long is this actually going to take? But that's kind of just off the cuff what I would say. It's just when you ask the question, I just started going through my Rolodex of different things that have come in, and they're so unique. Sometimes it's a culture challenge. Sometimes it's a time zone challenge. Sometimes it's all sorts of other things, IP, whatever. So it really just depends. And that's a part of my job is they come and I'm able to deliver that custom advice and the custom solution. I don't normally just send them a deck. But usually I'll get into the weeds and I'll show them an element of the deck. I say, look, here's an example that was very close to the problem you're having. Here's what the person did. And by the way, you can go talk to this person. Here's their name.
Yeah, for me, I think that the last point you made there on sort of systematic pilot design to me is so important, because that's something we've seen a lot where, we get excited or somebody gets excited by a new technology, a new solution that a startup's bringing, but they forgot to get the factory, or whatever it is involved in that. And those folks are like, guys, we have a roadmap of whatever, we can't implement this right now. Or, just doing some financial metrics on stuff like, what will my payback period be? It's like, cool, we could pilot this in one facility. What will it cost to scale it? I don't know if that, $100 million. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So to me, just getting smarter about how we design the pilots and get them aligned at the beginning can make a big difference. But it's still hard. But that to me is something that I think is really important.
Hey, Kyle, I just want to ask just very quickly. I mean, a leader like yourself who's created so much momentum, love the energy, right? And you're often people in your roles, they look at moving on to other things at certain points. But it seems like you've been able to deal with anything that's been thrown to you, create this wonderful system, artifacts, momentum in the organization. What's giving you all this energy to continue and really take bigger swings? And is there any daily habits or anything from you and your leadership perspective that you could share with our audience?
Well, I would say at the beginning of the program, I think I was always a thorn in the side of a researcher, because I'm always asking, well, have you looked externally? I mean, here's the publication, here's the patent, go look at that. What about this vendor? So I had the instinct that I wanted to be more external, which was, I think that's a bit abnormal for the typical ExxonMobil employee. So that I think that kind of fueled me at the beginning was just a vision that we need to be more external. It was aligned with strategy. So I know that I have management behind me on this, and I felt empowered to go do it. I was very empowered. I think what keeps the lights on for me is just the breadth of different types of people. I mean, I work with people literally all over the world. I work on problems across the entire company. If you can even start to imagine ExxonMobil Corporation, just the breadth of what we do. And at the end of the day, I'm a physicist, I'm a science guy. So I love getting in there on that new problem, getting under the hood with this team, like really getting in the weeds on that problem and learning about it. I just intellectually, it's an infinite well for me that I think it could fuel me pretty much forever. So I'd say that's what's carrying me now. Now that the culture change is coming around, it's not as hard to sort of sell this anymore. So I think I've achieved that mission. At least I've set us on the course that we will get there in the 5 years from now. But yeah, that's it for me. It's intellectual stimulation.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, that's part of what I love about my job anyway. I think Marcus would agree is we just get ourselves into so many different things, maybe sometimes a few too many things that we, but just the, jump, moving from problem to problem, startup to startup, opportunity to opportunity, I think is super cool. Okay. I know we're almost at time. A couple of other quick questions maybe that we can hit you up with. So what's one time that your gut instinct completely contradicted expert advice and you followed it anyway?
Well, I would say building an open innovation program from scratch. This has happened many times, where I said, hey, why don't we do it this way? And then somebody says, oh, you can't do that. That's not going to work. Okay. Well, then I go ask somebody else and I dig in. I think a great example I could point to is, the way that we work with our third parties now is radically different than how it was a year ago. And some of the models, for instance, I'm a huge fan of Kanban boards. I've always been using a Kanban board, and we've evolved that board over time. But the current iteration, I've actually enabled it such that our third parties, they can work directly in the same Kanban board. And I've gotten them out of their boards. They're using my board now. When I proposed this idea, it was like, no, obviously you can't do that. I mean, you can't have a third party log into our system. And sure enough, I was able to pull that off. So I think that was a really great tangible example where that's the thing. I think, and I've done this many times, but just testing a process. Oh, no, you can't do that. Well, why? Are you sure? And maybe if they say no, go to somebody else. And if four people would have told me no, 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 okay, that's fine. Pressure testing those processes. And I've got a bunch more examples I won't share.
But and it's so funny because that sounds relatively small, but it's not small at the same time.
It's a big deal. Instant
I'm sure
turnaround.
People on the inside were like, what are you talking about? You're going to share, people are going to log into our systems and move stuff around on a Kanban board. Like, you're out of your mind. This is not happening. And yet you just persevered through it. And then people probably after like, oh yeah, that's not such a big deal anymore. Or of course we do that because that's the best way to collaborate.
The message needs to be shared more broadly. I'll put it that way. So we're still in the early days, but I led with the value proposition. Here's what it is going to do. Here's what's going to save us time. We're going to go faster. We don't even really need to use email with these vendors anymore. Why do you need email? Just put it on the board. So leading with that value proposition, that was the guiding light, and you can get people to come behind you if you have that value case.
Right. All right. Maybe one last rapid fire question. So what's one trend that everyone seems excited about that you think is overhyped?
I would say, as a whole, every method that I'm excited about, that I preach, that I evangelize, is a global method. So you get out there, you're looking for the talent globally. You're looking for the startups globally. You're using global crowdsourcing. So in my experience, people can get really focused on what I call local innovation methods. It's like one place. It's one university. We're gonna, we need to work here. We need to broaden this here. And I would say, in my experience, in my travels, if you will, those global techniques, they can be faster, cheaper, and more effective. I mean, it's really that simple. And so that's what I would say. People, they get really excited about some of these local things. And yeah, I mean, we need that. We need space for that. All I ask of those individuals is also consider using these other more global techniques as well.
Right. That sounds a little bit like a bit of a bias to my own backyard, or I got to build my local ecosystem and I got to do things there with a lack of a lens towards, hey, there's a whole bunch of super interesting things going on in the rest of the world. And if we opened ourselves up to it and made it possible for folks all over the world to work with us, we can create even more value.
Yeah, I call it the comfort zone.
Yeah. So breaking out of the comfort zone is really.
They've been working there. They've had this partnership for 30 years. It's great. We need that. That's great. But they view that as enough. They say, no, we're very external. We've got this thing. We go here. We do this every year. And they're comfortable. And why would they want to disrupt that? Well, I think I made the case in this call of why. But
yeah, it's back to what's top of that page. You have to have grit and have to try to find ways to do things that are uncomfortable to really seek beyond the core. And that often does mean not just doing the same things over locally. So I think it's great that you have that kind of balanced viewpoint.
Yeah. Awesome, Kyle. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. Love the model. I believe, Marcus and I fundamentally believe in the power of big companies working with little companies. But you opened up some other ideas around the talent stuff, which I think is really interesting. And some of the conversation about driving more open sourcing of stuff from the corporate itself to say, what do we have that could be valuable to other folks that maybe pays back in the long term? So really appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kyle.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for the great discussion and the thought-provoking questions.